Starting and running a small business is no small feat. There are countless moving parts and a lot of money involved, so it's important to know how to fund your small business without going broke. In this video, I'll be discussing how to fund a small business and some strategies you can use to do so without breaking the bank. What is funding a small business? Funding a small business can mean a variety of things. It can be anything from putting your own capital into the business to finding investors to give you money. It can also be about finding grants and other forms of support to help your business grow. No matter what form of funding you decide to pursue, it's important to understand the different options and how they work. The first step to funding your small business is to assess your current financial situation. Do you have the money to put into the business yourself? Are you going to need to seek outside funding? If so, what kind of support do you need? These are all questions you should ask yourself before you start looking for funding. Common sources of small business funding. Once you've assessed your financial situation, you can start researching different sources of funding for your small business. Some of the most common sources of funding for small businesses include bank loans, government grants, private investors, crowdfunding, venture capital. You'll need to research each of these options to determine which one is the best fit for your business. It's important to note that not all of these sources are available to every business. You'll also need to do your research to find out which sources are available to you and which ones you're eligible for. Preparing for the funding process. Once you've decided on the best source of funding for your small business, it's time to start preparing for the process. This means gathering all of the necessary documents and paperwork that you'll need to apply. This could include business plans, financial statements, tax returns, and more. It's important to have all of these documents ready before you start the application process to make sure you're not wasting time gathering them at the last minute. Additionally, you'll want to make sure you have a solid understanding of your business's financials. This includes being able to clearly articulate your current financial situation, your goals for the future, and your plans for how you'll use the funding. You should also be able to explain any risks associated with your business and how you plan to mitigate them. Strategies for applying for funding. Once you've gathered all of the necessary documents and paperwork and have a solid understanding of your business's financials, it's time to start the application process. There are a few strategies you can use to ensure you're successful in the application process. First, you'll want to make sure you're submitting a well-written and organized application. This means clearly articulating why you're applying for the funding and how you plan to use it. Additionally, you'll want to make sure you're providing all of the necessary documentation and information. You should also be prepared to answer any questions that the funding provider may have. This means doing your research and understanding the different types of funding available and how they could benefit your business. Finally, make sure you're following up on any communications with the funding provider. Understanding different types of business loans. When it comes to small business funding, there are a variety of different types of loans available. These can include traditional bank loans, SBA loans, short-term loans, and more. Each of these loans has its own pros and cons, so it's important to do your research and understand which one is the best fit for your business. For example, traditional bank loans often have the lowest interest rates and the longest repayment terms. However, they also have the most stringent requirements. On the other hand, short-term loans often have higher interest rates and shorter repayment terms, but they also have fewer requirements. Setting up a small business budget. Before you start applying for funding, it's important to set up a small business budget. This will help you understand your current financial situation and how much you can afford to borrow. It will also help you plan for the future and make sure you're not overspending. When setting up a budget, make sure to account for all of your expenses, such as rent, utilities, payroll, and more. You should also include any money you plan to spend on marketing, research and development, and other areas. This will help you understand how much money you need to borrow and how much you can realistically afford to pay back. Alternatives to traditional financing. If you're unable to get traditional financing for your small business, there are still other options available. You can look into government grants, private investors, crowdfunding, or venture capital. Each of these options has its own pros and cons, so it's important to do your research and understand which one is the best fit for your business. Government grants can be a great source of funding for certain businesses. However, they often have specific requirements and can be difficult to qualify for. Private investors can be a great source of capital, but they'll usually be looking for a return on their investment. Crowdfunding and venture capital can also be great options, but they often come with a lot of strings attached. Tips for finding the right funding solutions. When it comes to finding the right funding solutions for your small business, there are a few tips you can use to ensure you're making the best decision. First, you'll want to make sure you're researching all of your options and understanding the pros and cons of each one. This will help you make an informed decision and ensure you're getting the best deal possible. You'll also want to make sure you're reading all of the fine print before signing any agreements. There are often hidden fees and other costs associated with different types of funding, so it's important to make sure you're aware of what you're getting into. Finally, make sure you're staying organized and keeping track of all of your documents and paperwork. The pros and cons of crowdfunding. Crowdfunding has become a popular way to fund a small business in recent years. This involves setting up a campaign on a crowdfunding platform and asking people to donate money to your business. While this can be a great way to raise money, it does come with its own set of pros and cons. One of the biggest pros of crowdfunding is that it's a relatively low-risk way to raise money. You don't have to worry about taking on debt or giving up equity in your business. Additionally, it can be a great way to get exposure for your business and build a community of supporters. However, there are also some cons to consider. For example, it can be difficult to reach your fundraising goal, and it can take a lot of time and effort to set up the campaign and market it effectively. Additionally, there may be fees associated with the platform you're using. Final thoughts. Funding your small business without going broke. Starting and running a small business can be an expensive endeavor, so it's important to know how to fund your small business without going broke. In this video, I discussed how to fund a small business and some strategies you can use to do so without breaking the bank. I also discussed common sources of funding, the different types of business loans, alternatives to traditional financing, and the pros and cons of crowdfunding. No matter which source of funding you decide to use, it's important to do your research and make sure you're making an informed decision. Additionally, make sure you're staying organized and keeping track of all of your documents and paperwork. With the right strategies and planning, you most definitely can fund your small business without going broke.